Good evening, campers, it's me, Kieran, and after 13 years, Bret Easton Ellis has finally released his latest novel, The Shards. Please note this is a review copy sent to me by Swift Press, so let's review it. 1981 in LA. Bret is 17, studying within Beckley College. This is before he would go to the prestigious Bennington College, where he would publish his first novel, Less Than Zero. And within The Shards, Bret Easton Ellis is in the process of writing the first draft. Yes, this does mean that The Shards is a fictionalized memoir, and Ellis is really blurring the boundaries between what is fact and what is fiction within his life. My preconception of what The Shards was going to be and what it actually is were very different. So let's talk about that first. While Ellis is writing his debut, Less Than Zero, I think you need to read Less Than Zero before jumping into The Shards. Seeing how Ellis viewed this era within his early 20s to how he is now viewing it with rose-tinted glasses and nostalgia within, well, he's nearly 60 years old, is definitely an interesting journey for the reader. And I could talk about Less Than Zero and The Shards simultaneously here because they both fall onto the same laurels, which is when people who have a lot of money have a lot of freedom, they realise that they need to construct something else around them to give them a purpose. Ultimately, this leads to their downfall. Bret and his friends have ultimate freedom. Their parents have the money. They also know who's who. Indeed, within The Shards, Bret absolutely adores the works of Joan Didion. He only has to ask one person, and it seems to be the easiest thing in the world to arrange. They have all the drink, they have all the drugs, and they have all the sex. They live this hedonistic lifestyle. They can just do whatever they want. Ellis's exploration of this is very strong because this is his shtick as a writer. This is what the majority of his bibliography has been exploring. The other book that I think you should read before jumping into The Shard is his controversial, his infamous, yes, American Psycho. Everyone's favourite killer, Patrick Bateman. Yes, The Shards really is the collision between Less Than Zero and American Psycho. Ellis's ideas on freedom and what it is to be at the cusp of adulthood are there to counterbalance the psychotic killings of the trawler within The Shards, which play on the ideas that Ellis brings forth in American Psycho about fantasy and constructing a narrative. There is a murdering spree going on within LA. The elusive The Trawler is gutting and mutilating women. The reason to why the trawler gets his name, we realise, is more farcical than actually serious. On the surface, it doesn't feel as though there's any rhyme or reason to why the trawler is doing these killings. But Bret has a conspiracy. Bret puts a narrative onto the trawler. For those who are unacquainted with Ellis's novel, narrative is not something that this man does. In fact, the first novel where we do get narrative is Glamorama. Ellis himself has even joked around that it took until his 30s for him to discover what narrative was. Glamorama uses narrative in order for Ellis to talk about a conspiracy theory, and in fact the first moment that we get a narrative within The Shards is for Bret to discuss his own theory about the trawler. Who is the trawler? The reason why he is killing these girls. The commonalities between all these girls. And that's Robert Malloy. Robert Malloy is the new kid. He's also the shifty kid. Ellis has seen Robert Malloy outside of a cinema, and when asked about the cinema, when asked about the film that he probably went to see, Robert gives no recollection, even though Bret is 100% convinced that Robert Malloy was the person that he saw. Bret is dubious, and that furthers his paranoia about Robert. As we learn about Robert's drug use, his breakdowns, his personal and family history, Bret begins to just pour out tendrils of story, convincing himself that Robert is the trawler. The difficulty here is that no one within his entourage, no one within his family has been paying attention. They don't know who the trawler is. They don't really know what Bret is talking about. But everyone else seems to get on with Robert, and no one really understands this fervent desire of Ellis to tarnish Robert's name. It might be because Robert could know that Bret's gay. Bret does have a girlfriend, Debbie, but like everyone else in his friend group, they're all having multiple relationships. And Bret gets close to a few of his friends, but most notably, he gets close to Matt. Matt is an outsider. He doesn't really speak to anyone. He doesn't really have any friends. But Matt as a character could definitely be placed within Less Than Zero. His parents are never there. He's doing all of the drugs. His parents don't even seem to know that he's doing drugs and is getting drunk. Like, no one seems to care about Matt. Bret seems to care way more after he gets killed. And while all that sounds interesting, I believe that The Shards is Ellis's longest work, and I can see why it took 13 years to write. Because this is one of the most boring books I have ever read. Nothing happens. Now, I've read a number of Ellis's novels, so I know that that is something that you have to prepare yourself for, but I cannot stress how much nothing happens in this book. Ellis's mentions of the background tracks that are currently going on while characters are speaking take up more page count than the acts of the trawler. In regards to character interactions, everything is stunted. No one really asks the right questions. They all kind of potter around. There's a lot of, what were you two talking about? We were just talking about you. What do you mean talking about me? We were just talking about you. What do you think we were talking about? I wouldn't know why you have to talk about me. The inability to communicate effectively works within Less Than Zero because it's under 300 pages. The Shards is just shy of 600, and there's a heck of a lot of it. And as I see it, The Shards resultantly lacks all tension, all grip on its reader, and there's no real consequence to anything. This means that the shock jock of American literature can't even shock you anymore. All these grim, gruesome depictions of the trawler's exploits are just a part of nothing, of endless music track listings, of unfinished conversations, of taking another Xanax. It's just this numb story that really excels in Less Than Zero, and I think you should read Less Than Zero. But for the 600-page The Shards is an absolute dire experience. Everything that I love about Ellis's work is in The Shards, and you can see it. You can see how Ellis is wanting to look back on these ideas and explore them within a new light. There's so much bunk in this that it lacks any of Ellis's spunk. There's a lot of spunk in this book, actually. I will give him that. If you're looking for a spunk-filled book, like, this is the book to go for. I've segued, but I can save myself. We'll go into the Testaments Club on this one. Ellis has done the same thing that he did in the novel before this, Imperial Bedrooms. Imperial Bedrooms is the sequel to Less Than Zero. The protagonist, who we saw this life of wonder and despair within his 20s, is now 40 and is trying to keep up with that lifestyle and ultimately learns that he can't. It was Ellis's weakest work to date. Ellis has done an Imperial Bedrooms on The Shards. Unequivocally a disappointment.